Welcome back, folks. This is episode 2. So if you watched the first one, that was just an introduction. This is Life in Apparel, our little show or podcast, where we're talking about everything men's, classic menswear, fashion, all that kind of stuff. This is episode 2. So we're going to be talking about what is a suit. We're going to define that. We're going to try to put it as clearly as possible, clear up some misconceptions people have and explain, what parts are important, how it all comes together, and really just define what is a suit, how it's worn, things like that. If you want to elaborate a little bit.
Well, yes, so the first thing that we want to establish with regards to the definition of what a suit is. In historical times, a suit was called a suite of clothes, and it is coming from a French word. The French word is suivre, which means to follow, and it's that parts of the outfit follow each other in the same fabric as the rest. So you can have an outfit that is still composed of the same types of garments, a coat and a trouser or a waistcoat, but is not in fact a suit. So for example, Keller today is not wearing a suit. He is wearing a sport coat and trousers, odd trousers, whereas today I am wearing a two-piece suit with an odd vest, or as we may be able to show you a little bit later, you can have a full three-piece suit. But the pieces do have to match, and that is the very basic definition of what a suit in fact is.
A lot of people will come and say, oh, nice suit, and sometimes it's jolly good, I am wearing a suit, but today technically I'm not. For most people, it doesn't really matter because, they don't use this terminology very often. It doesn't really make a difference. But hopefully through the show we'll educate people and it will become something people are more aware of. Because it's true, I'm not wearing a suit. I wouldn't say I am. Max wouldn't say I am. And it's okay if you don't know the definitions. Mm-hmm. But we're going to just talk about that. And as I think you kind of alluded to, we do actually have some examples we're going to show you later here on the camera. We'll describe it if you're not paying attention, just listening. When we get into different types of suits and different features that they might have, we'll bring up some examples that I've brought down from my own wardrobe. And so that's a good point. In a lot of these situations, right, it's a lot of times people can underdress, if they don't know the situation or the etiquette very well, but just as well you can overdress. For example, as I mentioned in the previous video when I was introducing myself, I'm a high school student, and I do dress very similarly to this every day. Sometimes it'll be a suit if I'm just feeling a little bit more formal, or I have like a presentation that day, but I always wear, a jacket, trousers. A lot of times I'll wear a waistcoat when it's not so hot, or a vest, same thing. But I wouldn't wear a tuxedo. That would be inappropriate. And so just as though you wouldn't want to just wear shorts and t-shirts, to the opera, because that would be inappropriate, you wouldn't wear a tuxedo just to go shopping, because that would also be inappropriate. So
that really brings it to a very fine point, mm-hmm. because you do have to look at the context of things. So for example, people would look at tuxedos as being a highly formal garment, mm-hmm. when in fact a tuxedo is an informal garment. It's meant for informal evening mm-hmm. occasions. And so, like a business suit is for formal business occasions, mm-hmm. generally speaking, or formal social engagements that do not take place in the evening. Mm-hmm. And so you want to kind of gauge how you decide to represent yourself in those situations. And that's part of life in apparel, or life in traditional menswear. So like, for instance, we're just having a casual conversation about clothing. I'm not really wanting to wear a formal business suit. Last episode I was coming from work, mm-hmm. so I was still in my more formal suit.
Mm-hmm. Today I was a little lazy getting dressed. I just threw on whatever. I think it works. Had a bow tie. I didn't want to tie a tie, but mm-hmm. And so it is in the world of classic menswear, dressing like this every day, you start to get a sense of formality versus casual, and how that's not just like, business suit, then tuxedo, then tailcoat, right? It's not just lateral like that. It depends on the occasion. It's a bit more complex, and when you get an understanding of that, it can also kind of help you realize different social aspects, different social things about the event, and how you should act and carry yourself.
Yes, and that's what gets to the essence of what is a suit, or what makes classical menswear.
Mm-hmm.
And the essential elements of classical menswear are as follows: the shirt, the trouser, of course, a proper pair of stockings or socks, proper pair of shoes, according to the occasion, a necktie or some kind of neckwear. And we may be able to touch upon some different variations of appropriate neckwear. Optional, although I don't think it's optional, but a waistcoat and then a coat. Those are the essential elements, and those can all be interchanged depending on what the situation is. But what you're really doing is you're kind of it's plug and play, right? Because then you have your informal evening occasion in a tuxedo. That's still the essential elements, right? Coat, a waistcoat or a cummerbund as the analog to that, a trouser, the appropriate pair of shoes, or even if you're so lucky and you get invited to a white tie event, which is the highest level of formality. That is a formal evening engagement. Usually you see those for things like state dinners for government people, but that is the tailcoat, a white waistcoat, a white bow tie, but it's still a coat, a waistcoat, trousers, the appropriate footwear. All the elements are still there. So as you're beginning your journey into classical menswear, you can, as soon as you can identify these pieces, it's easy to swap them according to your instinct for the occasion.
There's I'll try to find it once we're done. I'll put up on the screen here, but there's a quote someone made, and I'm going to mess it up a little bit, but it was basically, essentially, a gentleman should...
I'm reading it.
Yeah. A gentleman should acquire his wardrobe in a way that makes it easy to get dressed in the morning. You don't have to think hard because everything should just go together.
Editing Keller here. This is Sir Edwin Hardy Amies, a British fashion designer around the 40s, 50s, and 60s kind of time. And he said, a man should look as if he has bought his clothes with intelligence, put them on with care, and then forgotten all about them. Yeah, there it is. Thank you.
I woke up really late, and I just threw this on. I feel a little bit immodest showing so much shirt. I don't have a waistcoat like Max. It does feel a bit awkward sometimes. But, it looks good, right?
Well, and you substitute it by having a shirt with some color in it.
And so, if you assemble your wardrobe carefully and with thought, you don't have to put in that thought in the morning when you're late for work and you have to go get dressed or whatever.
But by which you mean, your wardrobe is laid out in front of you in the closet thoughtfully.
Correct.
So that you kind of, like the way I organize my closet, I have my more formal suits, tuxedo and the like, and then the more casual suits, and then I have my waistcoats also so arranged such that I can I go
grab and go.
This goes with this.
And so one thing that it kind of ties into this that a lot of people overlook, you'll see on the internet people correcting what a suit is, and it is technically true that a suit is a matching coat and trousers, optionally with a waistcoat. But one thing that they often overlook, and I'm glad that Max here pointed out, is that the shoes and the socks and the shirt and the neckwear is also just important. For example, I wouldn't wear a suit, a matching, coat and trousers without neckwear, because that would just be contradictory, right? If I was wearing, this would be fine. I could take the bow tie off, pop this button on the collar, and wear it even more casually. I think that would be okay. But there are different parts that you need to assemble. And Max pointed out the shirt, the pattern kind of helps, reduce the need for a waistcoat. But if I was wearing what Max was wearing, something similar, I wouldn't dream of, leaving without a tie.
Yes, and it's almost impossible to define the suit out of context with its history, which is what we're going to be doing for our next episode, is going into a overview of the history of not just the suit, but its preceding garments, because it helps to put all these things into context. A suit was never intended to be worn, for example, like Keller said, without neckwear, without a tie, or a bow tie.
Or a cravat.
Or an ascot, or any of these sorts of things. Because even for like if I'm doing yard work, I will still, some may find this excessive, but I will still I like to wear a white linen shirt, and I have a linen waistcoat that I wear because I like to have the pockets so I can put tools or any little thing that I might need in there. But I will still wear, for example, a bandana, which is, oh my God, it's shocking to wear a bandana, but it's to keep the sun off my neck. But a suit is designed from its very ancestry to be worn with neckwear. That's why it pains me so much to see a gentleman who's in a dark suit, a navy,
A business suit.
a black. I've even seen where they have no tie and a white shirt.
It's contradictory.
It's contradictory.
It's paradoxical.
It's paradoxical, and it's incomplete because it was never intended to be that way.
Because to our eyes, who live like this and who experience other people who live like this, that just looks like a gaping hole, right? If you are to dress without a tie, some people will, come into the, to our retail kind of deals, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't wear ties," but then they'll be buying like a black suit, and that just doesn't make sense. If you're so determined not to wear a tie, you need to dress for that, right? Dress for the context, the occasion, and put together an outfit that doesn't need neckwear, as a much more casual one. With an odd jacket.
Exactly. Because what I was saying, how I dress could be construed as quite excessive, and it probably even in historical times would have been seen as excessive. But if you're not going to have neckwear, well, then you can't wear a suit. You need to wear a sport coat, some slacks, and then you need to have like a pocket silk or something to break things up and show that you did in fact put some effort into the
to retain the elegance, right?
To retain the elegance.
And so, yeah, brief side tangent, and then I think we'll get into some of the more details of the suit and point out features of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned you like to wear the waistcoat just for the pockets. Sometimes when you're doing yard work, things like that, and I agree.
It's not buttoned though. I always leave it unbuttoned.
Yeah. One of the things I consider when I'm getting dressed is the functionality, because a suit is inherently functional as well as everything else that it is. For example, when I'm going to school or going to work, my pockets are full, and we'll get into it later. But there's some strategy of putting heavier things into different pockets to make sure it doesn't ruin the drape of your garment. But I have keys. I have my pen always. I took it out just for the recording about my sunglasses going here, my phone, my wallet, and then I'll have a briefcase for everything else that doesn't fit. But it is inherently functional. That's one thing that is a lot of people don't realize.
Well, I mean, it's a garment made for men, and except for certain periods of history, or in certain social classes, say like aristocratic Europe, men are very much not fussy. We don't want to fuss too much about our clothing, and so it unlike historically speaking women's clothing, which is very a lot of superfluous elements, lots of all these sorts of things. For men's clothing, we need to be able to live and work in it, and
simplicity is
but it's also got to be simple. It's got to be simple and straightforward. I mean, people used to fight wars in suits, not exactly like these suits, but they did fight wars in suits. I think that's a good segue into talking about the individual elements.
Yeah, so I think we're going to bring out some examples that I brought down, and then we're going to kind of point out some features. We're going to talk about what a lapel is, in case you don't know, things like that.
We can start with the coat. We'll start with the coat.
So I'll bring out a coat here.
Okay, so this is a new one that you just got in the mail.
Yeah, so actually I just opened this with scissors just a second ago, and maybe just as a little bonus I can put it on and show some things that I would change about it, because this guy does need alterations. I got it online, and so why don't we explain the different parts of this jacket. I'll put it on, see what we're looking for.
Yeah, well, we'll start to, so the essential elements of a coat, I'll have you hold it up for me, Keller. Essential elements of a coat is that it has long sleeves, has a collar, and it has lapels. And usually it will have 2 hip pockets. Always has at least 2 hip pockets. Occasionally has a third pocket here, and we may have a jacket over here that will explain it.
Actually, mine does here.
Oh yeah, it's the little ticket pocket there. Now, coats because it is the outermost layer of your clothing, it is going to be lined or half lined. This is a very heavy bird's eye wool, so if it is only half lined.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular jacket is, or coat, is what we call a double-breasted. It has 2 rows of buttons like this, and it buttons on this one and that here. And there's an internal button which is fastened to this area, and that will just help to stabilize it. But a coat is also a highly structured garment. This is very much unlike a lot of the clothes that you might be used to wearing or used to purchasing from a retail store or from a department store.
There's literal padding up here in the shoulders. It gives it structure.
There's even more. And maybe we can put a picture here of what the inside of a well-tailored suit looks like. It's not important what all those terms are, but that's to show you what a highly architected piece of clothing this really is.
There's a lot of thought and architecture that goes into this. There's a lot of really important considerations and details that you don't see on the outside, but there's canvas in here, different thicknesses.
And we'll probably go into more detail. We probably want to do a whole episode just on coats.
But for now, we've pointed out some of the important differences. And if you aren't familiar so much with single-breasted versus double-breasted, for contrast, we're both wearing single-breasted jackets. That means it buttons right here when we're standing up. And when I put this guy on, just to show you, it'll go over, even more. There'll be 2 rows. It'll go over on itself.
Here. You just try it on for the viewers here.
And so this guy will also explain, it is a little bit big on me, around the waist. Thank you.
I'm going to step out of frame.
And so this guy here, hopefully you can see decently well. This button here that fastens, it goes over this buttonhole here. A lot of people miss that step. And then it goes, well, I didn't do it right.
It takes a little bit of practice.
And then it buttons right here. You leave this one unbuttoned. And so as you can see, it folds over twice, as in contrast to the other guys. I'm going to try to crouch so you can kind of see a little bit better. As you can see, it's a little big around here, around the waist. I just got this guy in, but the shoulders are hanging good, the sleeves are a nice length. And so this is a double-breasted jacket. It still has the lapel, the collar over here, pockets, still a jacket, still a coat, but it's double-breasted, and the features are a little bit different.
Very interesting feature. I very rarely see this. It has only a single button on the cuff.
So that might have been because it's been altered before. Maybe it was just made that way.
And it also, these are details that we noticed, but we'll go over a little more of this when we talk about the history of the suit itself.
So this guy here, we also picked this one up today. Max already had it. We just got it from the tailor for some alterations. And this guy is a 3-piece suit, as you can see.
And this is one of my suits, and as you can already see the label, it is from Joseph A. Bank, but I had this one custom made there. They do some suits at a factory in the United States, but this is a this is a true suit, a true suite of clothes. And these are a canvas jacket. This one has 3 buttons. Some suits, this was very unpopular for several years, but usually it's starting to come back in a few different ways. So you can either have it in this sort of orientation, or you would have it where the button is hidden behind. But that's getting a little too into details for this episode, I think.
But as you can see, this guy, right, still lapel, still collar, still jacket. This guy has a matching waistcoat and trousers.
All the elements are still there.
And so you can still see all of the key features of the suit, but there's just a lot of diversity in the different ways you can do it. I mean, even just comparing the fabrics of these 2 guys. I'll maybe bring it up closer to the camera, just to make sure it doesn't mess with the focus. I won't. But this has a really wicked pattern with red and blue and white in it.
And very heavy. This is a very light Italian wool. It is from Vitale Barbari's Canonico, one of my favorite Italian mills, in a brown herringbone. So this is in fact a formal business suit, whereas the double-breasted coat there is much more casual.
And so another key element to note is how these suits can be very different depending on the season that they're intended to be worn or the climate of the area. For example, that coat there, the first one that I brought out, is a very, very heavy wool. That might be worn during winter or more frequently in places, you know, in the United Kingdom where it's cooler more regularly. Other places in Europe or anywhere that's cold, really. Versus that suit, the three-piece we brought out, is much lighter, more breathable. And you can see just how, you know, the suit is made for the man, anytime.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point, you know, for our introduction to what is the suit. In our next episode, we will be talking more about the history of the suit, you know, so that you get an understanding of the context of all of these different parts. And I think you'll find that really fascinating. And we'll have some more examples of modern garments so that you can kind of easily see some of the differences across the 20th century and early 21st century. Any final thoughts, Keller?
Yeah, so the history, we're just going to go over from the beginning of end. Curiously enough, the suit, we can pinpoint the exact day that it came into being, which isn't true for a lot of other historical kind of phenomena. And we're going to go all the way up to present day. And then in later episodes, especially for those who are already familiar with a lot of things we're talking about, we're going to get really in-depth into the really specific things for those who are curious. We want this show to be accessible to people who are just getting into this, just curious about it, and for people who are experts on the subject and, you know, want to get our, you know, professional, if you want to call it, insight. And
as we're going through, you know, what essentially is the first season of our podcast here, we want to hear from the viewer. We want to hear your questions. You know, help to direct us a little bit, you know, so that we don't end up talking about things that are of not great interest to you.
Or value.
Right? So if you know, because we want to be able to talk about eventually things like how to fit a coat on yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Not necessarily going to a tailor and having a tailor tell you what fits and what doesn't, because every tailor is different. They may be good or they may be not so good. And not feeling pressured to have a bespoke made garment that is not realistic. So we're going to be talking a whole lot about these sorts of things.
And we'll get there eventually. We have a lot to say.
There's a lot to talk about.
I have a billion things that I want to just communicate, but it doesn't really fit within the scope of this here episode, so we're going to call it there. But yeah, leave a comment for questions, like and subscribe.
And we thank you very much for watching the second episode of Life in Apparel today. We wish you well and to have a fabulous day.
Share with all your friends. Ciao.
Goodbye.